Hello and welcome back to the Rebel Author Podcast. Today I am with Zach Bohannon. Zach writes science fiction and fantasy, non-fiction books for authors, and is the host of the Career Author Podcast, as well as the co-host and organizer of unique author events such as Authors on a Train and the Career Author Summit. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Sasha, how you doing?
I am really good. And for anybody listening who hasn't listened to the Career Author Podcast, I absolutely love it and I highly recommend the podcast. So please do go and check it out, and I will make sure that all of the links are in the show notes. I've also voted on your event.
The poll we did.
Yeah.
I can guess where you probably voted.
No, I bet you can't. Yeah. So I will edit that out. But anyway, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you for the kind words about the podcast.
Oh, no, I speak only the truth. Everybody knows that. Brutal truth and honesty from me. So, can you tell listeners a little bit more about you and your journey and how you got into full-time writing?
Yeah, so I've been full-time since 2017. I published my first novel right at the beginning of 2015. Of course, as I know a lot of people listening and other authors, I've always written, blah, 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 all that stuff. I spent the majority of my 20s trying to be a rock musician. So I played drums in heavy metal bands, and I wrote lyrics in one of those bands. And so I always wanted to write. And of course, had tried starting novels and never finished anything. And finally just kind of decided to do it. And, my first novel did really well. And, I just kept publishing, and it led to me to the opportunity to go full time in 2017 after a nudge from Joanna Penn telling me it was time. So,
and just to tell everybody a little bit more about some of the events, because they are amazing, and I am so jealous of everybody going to the one in New Orleans over Halloween. But just tell everybody about the events that you run.
Yeah, so of course I do the podcast with Jay Thorne. You may hear his name come up several times through this because we do the podcast together. We also we've written over a dozen fiction books together. We run a publishing company together, and we do these events together as well. And so we have really two or three different types of events we do. So of course we do the bigger conferences. So we have the Career Author Summit. Some people may have heard it as the Somewhere Books Just Summit previously, but it was rebranded for this next year to the Career Author Summit. We've done two of those in Chicago so far, and we have it in Nashville in May of 2020. It's sold out, so no one's going to be able to get tickets. But so we have that, which is like a larger conference. When I say larger, we sell, I think, around 120 tickets, 115, 120 tickets. And like the biggest piece of feedback we've gotten is not to get bigger than that. And we really like that size. So we plan on keeping around that. We don't plan on going any bigger. And luckily, our motivation for doing that is not necessarily money, which we're going to talk about a lot. So today, so it's we don't really have to get big. We can keep to people's wishes with that. We also do these really unique world building events. And those are pretty neat because they're literally one of a kind. So you mentioned one. The one you mentioned is actually the only one we still have tickets available for in 2020, and that is Vampires of New Orleans. So we're going to go to New Orleans. so we're going to New Orleans Halloween weekend of 2020. Halloween is on a Saturday. We're going to have our event Thursday and Friday, and then we're going to spend people, if they want to spend the weekend in New Orleans, which you should if you're going down there because that's the best time to be there. But that's one of our world building events. So basically we get 15 authors in a room with us, and it is kind of a workshop too. Like Jay and I do some teaching, but what the bulk of it is we go, okay, we're going to sit together and everyone's going to sit in this room and we build a world out together. So in that instance, we're going to like kind of come up with a vampire world timeline, come up with rules for our vampires, all that type of stuff. And then everyone will go away after the event and write stories that are written in that world. And then we publish an anthology with all the stories when it's over, and we donate all the proceeds to charity and stuff. So it's really cool. We've also done Night of the Writing Dead, which is in Pittsburgh in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead. We've done Rock-a-Pock, which was an apocalyptic world building event. We did like at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, which was awesome. We also did Sci-Fi Seattle, which was we built the space opera world together in Seattle. That was just a few weeks ago or last month. So the cool thing about those events is they're unique. As we like to tell people, people, I'm not trying to tempt you, I promise, but people will say to us, like, oh, but people will say to us, oh, I'll just come next year. And we're like, there's not going to be a next year for that particular event. So like, we can only celebrate Night of the Living Dead once and do the zombie event. So so those events are unique. And then the other one, and kind of the one that Jay and I are probably most known for, is Authors on a Train. And if anyone I'm sure most of you listen to Joanna Penn's podcast. So you probably heard about him there a couple of years ago when me and Jay and her and Lindsay Broker all took the train from Chicago to New Orleans, and we wrote a book together in a week. And Jay and I turned that into an event where we take authors with us. And so we've done a couple of those. We've done that same trip from Chicago to New Orleans. And this January, we're going to be going from LA to San Francisco on the train and rent a mansion up in that area. And we're all staying together and going to collaborate on some stories. So that's a fun one. That's kind of the one we're probably known for the most. So so that's kind of, I guess, in a nutshell, some of the events we do. So
I think they're so cool and completely unique as well. You hear a lot of conferences and, one-day events and stuff, but you don't hear of these more unique niche type events, especially in places like New Orleans, which is so full of inspiration anyway for authors. So
yeah, or like, when we did the Rock-a-Pock one, we're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the VIP room and stuff. And it was really neat. So, and those events are fun. Like I said, we're with 15 authors and we're just world building, and it's awesome. And people come up with story pitches and pitch their stories and stuff, and everyone's given fee. It's just awesome, like the collaborative effort that goes into those events. So
fabulous. I hope I can one day make them. And if you ever venture this side of the world, I will definitely be making one. Okay, so on to the topic of our discussion, which is money. While it's not always the case for every author I know, I think most indie authors want to write full-time. I think that's probably why they choose to go indie rather than being traditional. And I think a huge part of that is around financial freedom and earning enough money. And yet I find that money is still a really taboo topic in the indie world. I would love to get rid of that taboo. And that was why I approached you in the first place for this podcast. So what do you think are the key steps an author would need to take financially in order to quit their job?
Well, the first thing I'll say is just put a disclaimer that I am not a financial expert. So this is just a topic that both of us are really passionate about. And like you said, there's a lot of taboos around money, especially in our circles and stuff. And it's just something that really interests me and something that, like you, I'm trying to kind of get rid of and I'm really passionate about. So, but that being said, I'm not a financial expert. So
and neither am I.
So talk to an accountant or a financial expert before, don't just take our advice necessarily.
No suing allowed.
The big thing for me is I think that you really have to ask yourself, like, how bad do you really want to do this? And what does being a full-time writer look like for you? And what kind of life is that going to allow you to live? And the reason I say that is because one of the things that I see in the author community and honestly, it really kind of drives me a little nuts, is that is the idea of always talking about success in terms of royalties and money. And that drives me crazy. Obviously, we need money to live. Money is an ends to a means. Like, we need to be making money to make this happen. If you're not earning, then it's going to be hard for you to be full-time and to do this. But like, I just, and I'm not on social media anymore. And this is a big reason why, honestly. But when I was spending a lot of time in author groups and stuff, you would see people brag about, oh, I made this much money this month. And everyone's like, oh, I really wish I could do that. And blah. And my question is always like, well, why do you need to make that much? Like, and we don't know the stories that those authors have. It may look like they're making bukus of money, but they could be in a ton of debt or something like that. Like,
they could be spending it all on advertising.
Or absolutely, you're exactly right. They could be spent on advertising. There's a lot of different things to look at, and some authors will share that. Like, some authors will say, well, this is how much money I actually am making. This is like my take home. But like, I don't know, for me, it's like, obviously money is important, but my big motivation for being able to do this is not to have money to be able to buy more things or to be able to do this or that. It's to be able to do this, to be able to make my own schedule, to be free. For instance, this Friday, my daughter is getting an award at her school, and it's like a secret that she doesn't even know about, and I'm going to be able to be there. And it's all, and like, I don't have to ask anybody. I don't have to take off from, like, I can just go. I'm just like, okay, cool. That's easy for me to go. To me, that's success. That is more, that's how I define success more than I define how much money I'm making. That's not how I define success. I define success by the fact that my daughter, when she was in her daycare, had there was a thing called Donuts with Dad one morning, and I got to go, and I was one of only 4 dads there in a 15-kid class, and kids were crying because their dads weren't there. And like, I understand, because they have other jobs and it's probably hard for them to ask off for something, but like, that's the type of stuff I don't have to miss. So to me, that's being successful. So to go back to your original question, to me is like, really think about, if you really want this, like, the first, I get asked all the time, how'd you make enough money to go full time? And to me, that's kind of the wrong question, because it's not, I'll be really honest. Like, I'm not rolling in the dough on royalties, and so, and I'm definitely not primarily making my income off fiction. These events and stuff definitely help. Even though some of these events don't necessarily, pull a lot of money in, but I've built my life to where I just don't need a lot of money. I think that's the real key, is that, that I don't have a debt, that's don't have a ton of debt. That's the big thing, other than a mortgage. I mean, my wife and I worked really hard to get out of debt. I think that's the biggest thing anyone can do before jumping full time, because the less bills you have to pay and less money going out, the less money you need coming in. And that's kind of controversial for a lot of people to hear, but I don't put my business stuff on credit cards or anything like that. It's just not the way that I want to live. And so to me, that's the biggest thing. And then just also, I kind of live a minimalist lifestyle. I don't really need a lot of stuff. So, to me, those, like, because I would rather be doing this, I would rather be making my own schedule, not having to miss things with my kid, and being able to, like, live the life I want this way, with my schedule, than like have a bunch of stuff or have a bunch of payments on things or be paying the bank. So to me, I think that's really, because the quickest way to give yourself a raise is to spend less money. So, and I think the less you have going, especially to creditors and stuff like that, the better off you're going to be. And I know it's not the answer a lot of people want to hear, but it's just something I really feel strongly in. And I know from talking to you before that I think you have similar beliefs there. So.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm nodding furiously back here, because I'm like, all of the points, I just agree with all of them. I think, when I was in full-time employment, I was constantly stressed because I had to leave at certain times to pick up my son, and if I didn't, and then what if I was late, and blah blah blah, and what if I had to ask my mum? It is so stressful. And now I'm just like, I need to go now, so I'm gonna go now, and it's completely, I'm completely free. But I think there's a couple of points there that I wanted to come back on. And the first one is something that I heard recently, and I think it was in a Rich Dad, Poor Dad audiobook, but one person's asset is another person's liability. So where you were talking about reducing debt, any debt that you have, is the bank. Essentially it's their asset. Your debt is making them money, so
that's how they make their money. Yeah,
exactly. And the other point, which was such an epiphany for me when it happened a few years ago, is that if you have paid off all of your debt, and let's say you're spending 500 quid a month or $500 or whatever a month on paying back debt, you just don't need that money, which means the bar for which you have to earn in order to survive is that much lower.
Absolutely.
Now, nobody's saying that you're going to earn that forever. Nobody wants to just earn what you have to earn to pay your bills.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
But if you want to get out, that's the way to get out, So it was such I spent years not recognizing that. So yeah, I just think that's a huge.
And I think for me too is if I had a book take off tomorrow and got a movie deal and all this stuff, and I got a big, whatever, was just started making way more than I am now, nothing really changed for me. I'd pay my house off. And, my wife and I might travel a little more than we do now, but other than that, nothing really would change, so I think that's really, really important too. So.
Yeah, exactly. You are my friend. I'm going to name drop her because she'll appreciate this. But Susie always says to me, she wanted to create a life she didn't want to take a vacation from. I think that's how you say it. Something along those lines.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you too, going back to something else that you said was, talking about the banks, one of the biggest thing I'll hear from I have one friend specifically who is, he's really into credit cards, but he pays off the balance every month, which is a dangerous game to play. Like a lot of people will say, yeah, because if you miss a month or miss 2 months or, then all of a sudden you've got this interest, but, he does it for the points. And my question is always like, well, and I think Dave Ramsey says this, he's who you're probably going to hear me mention a lot, but like, do you know any millionaires who became that way based off credit card points? Like that's just a marketing ploy from the creditors because they want you to use their credit card in hopes that you're not going to pay it off. Yeah. And I guarantee you that the cash back you're getting if you do start missing payments is going to be way less than the interest you're going to pay.
Oh yeah, it is. That is one of there are various books that I have read on this topic, and all of them without exception, cash rich is the only way forward, essentially.
And the ones that go the other way, I won't mention it, but there's a pretty popular finance book out there right now that's kind of making the rounds, and Jay actually loves it. And it's one thing we disagree on, but the book starts off talking about how to take advantage of your credit cards. I put the book down immediately. I was like, I just don't, I went a little bit further, but I just so disagreed with it. I was just like, it was like, don't budget. And then was talking about credit cards and take advantage. I'm like, okay, it's just not for me. And I just, I have a plan that's worked for me. I'm just going to stick with that. So.
Exactly. I probably would have put that down as well. Budgeting is the way that I got to leave my job and pay off all the student debt and all of that stuff. So yeah. Yeah, I'm shell shocked. How can there be a finance book that says that? Anyway, sorry. No. Okay. When I was employed, I was at risk of redundancy on a number of occasions. Being a business owner now obviously carries inherent risk, but what can an indie author do with their business to safeguard themselves from financial jeopardy?
It's a really, really good question. And I think one thing to recognize is, and this is going to be tough for people to hear who just want to write, is there are very few and far between. There are very few authors out there who are just making money off their fiction. I'm assuming, this is for fiction authors, because nonfiction is obviously a different thing, because usually there's other things that go into that. But so I think one of the biggest things you can do is, have multiple revenue streams. And when I say multiple revenue streams, I'm not necessarily like, one of the things that immediately comes to people's mind is they think, oh, well, okay, well, should I be in KU or should I have my books wide? And that's not what I'm talking about. That's obviously one decision you have to make, but that's not the type of diversification of income I'm talking about. I'm talking about, what other skills do you have that you can use to create this life for yourself, where you will also, you're going to be writing, you can make that your primary thing, but you might have to do some other things to make money, like do some other type of freelance work. And this is one thing that Joanna, she'll send me and Jay a message every now and then. Her and Jay have regular meetings, and she's always asking, are you still diversifying income, or do you have other revenue streams? And she puts a lot of emphasis on that, and I totally agree. Now, hopefully one day it comes to a point where you can get to that point where you can just make money, and maybe you can, because maybe you have, everyone's situation is going to be different. So maybe you're in a position where your partner is making enough money to really support you, and you don't have to do that. So it's going to be a little different for different people. But I think that's a big thing is to think about other ways you can, have other revenue streams. I mentioned we're doing these events. And I said earlier our main motivation is not money, but that is a motivation. That is it is another revenue stream for us. And Jay, he does a lot of coaching. I do a little bit of that, but not very much. Jay does quite a bit. He does some editing and stuff too. But we have multiple revenue streams. We're not just dependent on our book royalties. And so I think thinking of a skill you can take to use, and maybe it's related to authors, maybe it's not. Maybe you're really good at crafts and you can have an Etsy shop that you're doing stuff with, but at least that's going to get, if you are in a job, if you're stuck in a cubicle and you're trying to get out of that and you want to be able to create your own schedule and have more time to write and more time to do the essential things that you really want to do, I think that's something you really have to think about.
Yeah, and I would add to that to, excuse me, think about, so I always talk about money in terms of two types of money. There's active money and passive money. And passive money is the obvious one for authors. It's earning money whilst you sleep. It's creating a product that you can sell over and over again that will bring you money in your sleep. You earn passively from it basically. And then active money is anything that requires you to trade your time in order to get paid. So for example, being a consultant, perhaps you leave your job, but you go back and you consult one day a week, or you teach, or you do editing. For example, you mentioned editing there. That would be an active type of income. And I think when you first, certainly for me anyway, I found, having left my job, I'm so afraid of not being able to pay my bills, that I've over-egged the active income and have probably traded a bit too much of my time. But it's about that balance and understanding it. But that is something that I would say to anybody planning on being self-employed, is to think about the balance and actually make sure you do have a bit of both, because obviously active income is short, sharp cash injections, whereas passive income you have to build, and it is slightly slower. Yeah. Okay. So, do you have any tips or tricks for budgeting? How do you go from loads of debt to actually being able to quit?
Well, I think the first thing is you need to do it. I think, a lot of people, it's something they just kind of ignore, like a toothache, and pretend like it's going to go away or it's going to fix itself. And I think that I'm not saying that you need to necessarily sit down and, be looking at your money every single day and have update spreadsheets every day. But I think you need to have an idea of where your money's going, because it can really, really surprise you. You'll hear the analogy, and I know some people are tired of hearing this, but you'll hear a lot of financial people say, you can't be drinking lattes every day. And, when you really add up how much that cost, and you throw on top of that you might not just be having a latte or a coffee every day, but maybe you're also going to lunch and spending $10 at lunch. And when you add that up, that's what happened to me. When I started adding that stuff up, I was like, holy crap, I'm spending this much money just going out to eat for one meal a day, and then also getting a coffee in the morning. And it really woke me up and made me realize, okay, maybe I can cut back on this. But here's the thing, the numbers don't lie. So, but you need to know what those numbers are, and you need to know exactly where your money's going. And You know, as far as getting out of debt, I think that as I mentioned, I really like Dave Ramsey, and he's kind of, big anti-debt guy, and he's local to me as well. He's here in Nashville, Tennessee and stuff, but he's got a national radio show here in the US and stuff as well. And his book, The Total Money Makeover, to me, that's the one book I recommend everybody. But he's got a really good plan called the snowball effect. And he's got different baby steps, but basically, just to kind of give a few, like the first thing is you save a $1,000 emergency fund. So that's the first thing you do. And again, like it may sound daunting to some people. How am I supposed to save $1,000? But again, if you go back and you start looking at where you can cut, it'll come way faster than you think it will. So you do that, and then if you have debt, you look at all your debts, you write them all down, and you start knocking them out. Except for your mortgage. Mortgage comes later. You don't worry about that one. But all your other debts, credit cards, car payments, student loans, all that, you start knocking out from the smallest to the largest. So and I'm talking about smallest, like amount that you owe. So don't worry about the interest rate, all that stuff. You just pay minimum payments on everything else, but you really start throwing everything extra you can towards the smaller amounts. And the reason you do that is because it's a mental thing. So once you start knocking out those smaller debts, it's going to motivate you. If you try to tackle your $40,000 student loan first, you're probably really going to just want to give up after a while. So, but if you can get these small victories, it's just like writing a book. You get through a chapter and a chapter, and then once you finish one book, it's like, oh my God, I'm ready to do another one. So that's kind of his plan. You do that. And you're also, another thing, and some people don't agree with this, but you're not contributing towards retirement when you're doing that either. So you put off your retirement, that comes later, which I know a lot of people won't agree with. But the fact of the matter is, you're looking at getting like a 12% long-term return on your retirement. And that doesn't really help if you're paying 21% interest on a credit card right now. So, get that. You can say you'll have all this money to save later if you don't have these debts. It's like you said, if it's not there, you can put your money other places. So, but basically you just knock them out, small ones. And then, once you get past that, you, start paying on your house, and you start paying, I believe it's like 20, he recommends either 15 or 20%, I think 20% towards retirement at that point. And he recommends mutual funds, that's what I invest in. So, that's pretty much, but his book, The Total Money Makeover, really kind of lines all that. It helped me and my wife get out of debt really fast. I mean, we were lucky not to have student loans. But we got out of, like, I think, probably around $20,000 worth of debt in a really short amount of time. I mean, I think it was maybe under a year. I mean, it was pretty fast by using that method. It may have been a little longer than that. It was several years ago now, but we got out pretty fast because, like, once you really see where your money's going and you really think about this stuff, and one thing he says I love is live like no one else so that tomorrow you can live like no one else. So you might have to give up those lattes for a while. And I think temporary deprivation is okay, but like later on, that stuff's not going to matter because you're not going to have you're not going to have this debt and stress to worry about. And you can, you'll have more to do with your money, the stuff you want to do. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. Even on the days where freelancing and being self-employed is difficult, I would never ever change it in a million years. And if, a couple of years of deprivation is what it took to get me here, well, I would do that every day of the week.
And I think once you really get on a plan like that, and you really get into it, like, you'll be surprised where money will start coming from. You're probably going to want to sell things. You might start Ubering on the weekend. You might go deliver pizza. I mean, maybe pick up more freelance gigs. Like, you're going to really want to get this debt and stuff paid off as fast as you can. And like I said, it really set me up to be at a point where it was really, when it came time, I stayed at my job longer than I should have, honestly. And when I finally quit, like, we were in good shape. So.
Yeah. Amazing. I'm going to ask the same question, but this time in terms of business. So I know it's hard. Well, I found it hard, certainly at the beginning, to know where to spend money in my business. I definitely got carried away with the latest thing, and some of them were useful, like vellum. But you can end up hemorrhaging money, be it on ads or software or gadgets or whatever. So, any budgeting tips or tricks to know what's a good spend of money on your business and what's a bad spend of money?
I think that's going to depend from person to person. I know for me, I keep my business really lean. And I came from a job where I was able to learn from somebody who was very frugal, I would say. And this is another good book recommendation. If anyone has read The Millionaire Next Door, that was my old boss, Mitch. He was like the epitome of that. He's a millionaire, but he buys all his clothes at Goodwill. He buys used vehicles with cash. Like, he's the epitome of that person. But he taught me a lot about just running a really lean business and not spending money where you didn't need to. And to some people, it sounds a little extreme, but when you really sit back and think about it, and it's your money now going out, then you really are like, okay. So to me, I think first off, it's important to realize, like, we are running a business. If you're wanting to be an author, I don't care if you're independent or if you're traditionally published. I've seen a friend's traditionally published marketing plan lately, and I'm like, oh, well, they're still going to be paying for a lot of their own marketing, doing a lot of their own stuff. And this was, traditionally published Big Five house, obviously. You're running a business. It's gonna cost some money. You're gonna have to have a marketing budget, and there's gonna be some things you have to pay for. What kind of bums me out is when I see people complain about stuff costing too much. And I think about, how lucky we are that we don't have that much overhead. I mean, one of my best friends started a coffee roasting business recently. And before he could even sell a coffee bean, he had to put $25,000 into it because he had to build a place. He had to get a roaster. He had to get a website built for online ordering. I mean, there was a lot of stuff he had to do. This is actually my same friend I have the credit card points debate with. Funny. Hi, David. I know you'll never listen to this, but he's not an author. He's not going to care. But I think just, it's really easy to get distracted, as you're saying, by like the newest gadget, or I've seen people stress about like, oh, well, like what writing software should I use? Should I get this or that? And I think that it doesn't matter what you write in. Yes, Scrivener's great. I think Scrivener is probably the best thing, but Scrivener's only $40. So like, don't beat yourself up over Scrivener. But other than that, you're going to need a mailing list. You're going to have to pay for that at some point. MailChimp, I know you can start for free, but at some point you're going to have to pay. You're going to need some kind of advertising budget, especially as you get more books. It's funny, we just recorded an episode about that advertising with Career Author, and Jay and I are in a really weird place with that because I don't know, like, I think unless you have a long series, like spending too much money on advertising is kind of hard, but it's also a thing where it's kind of necessary. So I don't know, I'm in a weird place with that, but and then always my two non-negotiables for sure is always pay for a good editor and always pay for a good cover designer, unless you are a cover designer. Not Photoshop, I know how to do Photoshop, but you actually can design covers. And I know very few authors who are good cover designers who can make their own covers. You should pay someone who can do it well and do it in your genre. That, and as I said, pay a freelancer to edit your book. And at least do line edits and stuff. I think those are two non-negotiables. And again, it's not that much money. And like, especially for the business we're running, it's very, very, very low overhead. So when I see people complain about that, I'm just like, go try to start coffee roasting business or a restaurant or something like that, where you're going to spend thousands of dollars before you can even make a penny.
Yeah.
So it's very, very low.
Excuse me. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's a mindset shift. I think, yes, when you are writing a series, you are probably going to have to sink a few £1,000s on covers and edits, in that series. But the whole point is you will make that money back millions of times over the course of the years, because you're creating something that can pay you back forever, or for your whole lifetime, plus 50 or 70 years, depending on whatever country you're in. So it is a bit of a mindset shift. And I think the same can be said around the advertising. I also am not advertising my current fiction because I'm waiting until I finish this third book, because what's the point? That you can't, most people obviously will reduce the first one and then you'll get the sale through. But with the advertising, I think it's the same mindset shift in that if you have got the data to say, you're spending $10 and you're making $100, then why would you not want to spend $100 to make $1,000? But that mindset shift to spend that money is very difficult. I think a lot of people are afraid. I think there's a lot of fear around that. But yeah,
and I think that there are. I mean, you should be investing in yourself too. Like, I think it's important to, buy courses. Buy books. Obviously, like, educate yourself on craft stuff like that. Go to events. Go to conferences. I mean, you should be investing in yourself as well. But try not to get too caught up with, the latest gadget or whatever. I mean, I wrote a lot of my first books, like, on a 10-year-old laptop sitting in the back of my car on my lunch break. So, like, it wasn't, I think on like Scrivener, or sometimes even on like Google Drive, which is free. So, I mean, really, like, you shouldn't have to invest. Like, don't try not to get too caught up in all that fancy stuff. Because in a lot of times, honestly, that's resistance. And I'm talking about like resistance with a capital R, like Stephen Pressfield talks about.
Yeah.
Like, you're just, just write.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I used to write down the corridor on my phone, waiting for meetings or people to come into meetings,
Yes.
Literally. Yeah. I mean, I kind of wish I still have that. I don't quite know what's happened to it. That I definitely have some resistance issues now, but yeah, I think, that is it. You write anywhere, anytime, any place, no excuses. Okay, so I think you've probably answered this question, but I'll just ask it in case there's anything else you can think of. But key books or resources you would recommend? I know you've mentioned a couple.
Yeah, those are my two favorites. As I mentioned, The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey, and then now I just forgot. It's Millionaire Next Door. Yeah, is the other big one. I can't remember the author on that one, but those are my two by far like favorite financial books, and the two that I'd recommend the most. And Dave Ramsey also has a podcast, and he has a national radio show, but they do a podcast version of it, so people can go listen to that. And so he'll have people call in and talk about how they got out of debt and how fast. And it is amazing when you hear some of the stories, and it's like super inspiring and encouraging when you hear how much debt people got through with the income they have. Like, if you're sitting at home saying, I'm not sure I could do this, like, you'd be really surprised by some of the stuff people can do if you just, sit down, put your mind to it and focus on it. But those are the two big books I personally would recommend. So.
Yeah. I will add another one, because why not? Yeah. But I read The Barefoot Investor, which I really liked, and he has a very similar ethos to Dave Ramsey. Some of the things you were saying about saving £1,000 and doing the domino, all in there as well. So I think it's got Pope or Pape, and it's The Barefoot Investor. But what I will do, I've just written them down. So if you heard scribbles on my mic, it's because I was noting them down, because I'll make sure they're in the show notes. Okay, so I have a question from Patrick, who is a patron, and he says, most authors I know seem content with building a publishing business, which is a great way to create passive income. But what are your thoughts on diversifying one's asset portfolio by using a publishing company as a springboard into unrelated sectors, such as property investment and the stock market? I know you kind of alluded to this a bit earlier. So, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, as I've said, if you don't have debt other than a mortgage, like if you have a mortgage, that doesn't count. But if you don't really have debt, then you absolutely should be investing in the stock market and thinking about your future. Again, like 15 to 20% of whatever you have coming back, you should definitely be investing. And property investment, I think, is a really good. I know a couple authors who actually do that, who have done pretty well, and that's one. And even now I'm talking about like authors who've like 7 figures, and that's one way they've diversified their income. Obviously that's riskier and there's a lot more money there, but and you kind of need to know what you're doing, but I think that's a really good investment. So I think if you're in the right financial position, and you're not you don't have a bunch of debt over your head. So I think that's real. I think those are both really good things. And again, if you kind of know what you're doing, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just reading what's it called? Rich Dad Poor Dad's Guide to Investing. No, I'm listening to the audiobook because I am just about now starting to be interested in that area as well.
Yeah.
And it's interesting actually, because this is a conversation I'm having with several authors at the moment who are all starting to think about actually, how else can they earn money passively. I think this is going to become a trend with indies. Anyway, right, this is the Rebel Author Podcast. So tell me about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
I know it's cliche, but I guess it's probably when I quit my job. That's like the best thing I could probably think of. As I said earlier, I waited way too long. I should have left way sooner. Again, we were in a really good financial situation. My wife's a massage therapist, and so she's got a job she loves. Only having to work 4 days a week, which is awesome. So, really, really rad. But yeah, that was probably it. I mean, and I've told this story in another podcast about how, I know the moment that I wanted to leave. And it was, I'll keep the story short, but basically my boss, after something, I would go into my work and I would write. I was a warehouse manager or operations manager for a big music instrument distributor, like worldwide and for the North American facility. And I had like 15 employees I managed and stuff, but I would get in the office really early every day, and I'd beat all the bad traffic here in Nashville, and I'd get there early and I'd work on my writing business in the building. I had a key and stuff. It was no big deal. And I would get there really, and I would still like get to my desk like 15, sometimes even 30 minutes early and start working. And one night, the cleaners who worked at our place stole the president of our company's laptop. And the next day my boss came to me and was like, yeah, we're not going to be able to let you come in the building anymore. And they weren't accusing me of doing it by any, or like doing anything by it, but it was more just like for your safety. And I totally understood. I was like, that's cool. I understand. Kind of sucks. And it kind of bummed me. It kind of pissed me off because there were other people that got to come to the building like on the weekends and work, which was like, what's the difference? But anyways, but the part of that conversation that I didn't like, and this is where I put everything together later when I was like, oh, well, they're letting this guy come in on the weekends and work when no one's here and do stuff. Was he said to me, well, honestly, like, I really don't think you should be writing in the morning before you come to work. And I was like, oh, okay. And this was my direct boss, not the president of our company, but, and just to be clear, like I have a good relationship with this person, no ill will. And he wasn't a creative. So he didn't understand that by telling me that and by suggesting that because his whole thing was like, I'm not sure if you're like really focused when you come in. It's like, no, dude, it's the opposite. If I don't do this before I come, it's all I'm going to think about. And all I'm going to be thinking about is when I get to my lunch and when I get home from work and I can actually work on this. But I was able to come in like knowing, oh, I've already written like 2,000 words this morning or whatever. I feel good. I can focus on my work now. That was the moment I knew, okay, I'm done. And I stopped. I started getting to my desk right when I was supposed to, because I had to start going to a coffee shop and work, sometimes right in my car. But I knew then, but it was about probably, I think it was maybe a year after that. And when we were on the Authors on a Train trip, and on that last night, we were all kind of drinking, and Joanna had a few drinks in her, and she looked at me and she said, can I cuss on your podcast, by the way? I forgot.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So Joanna will love this because Joanna hates dropping the F-bomb and stuff, but I'm going to call her out. And she looked at me and she said, you're fucking scared. And she's really, like, Joanna's the sweetest person ever, but she's kind of intimidating in person when you meet her. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And because the whole week I'd obviously been able to talk to her about my situation and, leaving my job, and healthcare was a big deal because my wife doesn't get healthcare through her job. So I knew that's a whole other thing in the United States that we have to deal with. And anyways, Joanna was like, you're scared. You just need to go home and quit your job. And I was like, okay. So I came home and I told Catherine, I was like, I think I'm going to quit my job. And she just goes, finally. That was my wife's reaction. She was like, finally. And so it took a slightly drunk, angry British woman to tell me off. To get me. Yeah, I walked in once I got back to work. My boss was actually on vacation. When he came back, I had a letter ready, and I was like, I'm done. And 3 weeks later, I was gone. So I guess that was probably my most rebellious moment for sure. So, but
that's so funny. You, if Joanna Penn tells you to do something, you absolutely should do whatever it is that Joanna tells you. It's funny because I spoke to her just before I quit, and it kind of, she was like, you should quit. So she's awesome, and she was right. I mean, and what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Like, my wife and I put ourselves in a really good financial situation. My wife has a really good job, and it's like, okay, if it doesn't work out, I'll just go get another job. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But it's worked out. We haven't missed any bills, and we've been living fine. So everything's working out just fine. So
absolutely. So if you're listening and you're scared and you're in a good financial position, just fucking quit.
Yeah. Well, maybe get rid of some debt and stuff first.
Yeah. No. The caveat
I know. I'm just messing with you.
Okay. Tell readers where they can find out more about you, your books, and your podcasts.
Well, I think for this audience, being writers, I think that the best place to send them is just to thecareerauthor.com. That's where you can get information on the podcast. You can also find the podcast wherever you're listening to this one right now. It'll be on there. But we have stuff on it. We have our podcast over there. We have all the information on our events. Where they sell out quick, and there's a mailing list you can get on there. We're going to be announcing our next, I know this sounds crazy, but we're going to be announcing our 2021 events in May of 2020 at the Career Author Summit. There's obviously a lot of logistics and stuff that go into them, especially with some of the stuff that we're thinking about. We announce them kind of far out. So anyways, you can get on a wait list over there, and you'll get information as we put them out, or listen to our podcast, we'll put it out. But and then we have books and stuff. We have our big nonfiction thing we're working on is we have a book coming out probably early next year, maybe this year. We're not really sure yet, but called the 3-story method. And this is the process that Jay and I use. It basically will take you from idea all the way up to getting you ready to draft your book. So it's kind of our proven process that we've used between the two of us over like 20 books now that we've published. So we'll have that coming out, and there's a 3-story method tab up at the top. We're really excited about that though. And we're going to have some courses and some kind of live events and stuff planned around that too. So people who have been through it already and come to our other events and experience are loving it. So we're really excited to get that book out there. But that's the best place if you like post-apocalyptic sci-fi and you're interested in any fiction stuff. You can go to moltenuniversemedia.com. That's probably the best place. And that has all the books. That's our publishing company. So that has all my books and Jay's books. And we are currently working with 10 other authors to publish them. So we'll have some other stuff coming out from other authors really soon. So
amazing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. Thank you to everybody supporting on Patreon. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, you can do so by going to www.patreon.com/Sasha Black. Thank you to everybody listening. Thank you to Zach. I'm Sasha Black. You were listening to Zach Bohannon, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast.